My name is Ibrahim Traore. I speak to you tonight not as a symbol, not as a slogan, and not as a man trying to persuade. I speak as a human being who has learned, slowly and often painfully, how small he truly is. I was born into a world that taught me strength early. In my country and the Sahel, strength is not a luxury, it is a necessity. You learn to stand upright while the ground beneath you keeps shifting. You learn to make decisions knowing that every choice carries weight, sometimes the weight of lives. Many people see the uniform before they see the man. They see the office before they see the soul. But before I became anything in the eyes of the world, I was simply a man searching for direction. There was a time when I believed discipline alone was enough. Order, planning, control. I believed that if a man thought clearly enough and worked hard enough, he could hold his world together by force of will. That belief carried me far, but it did not carry me through everything. There came a moment in my life when the noise became too loud. Responsibility without rest, decisions without certainty, leadership without refuge. It was during that season that I was baptized, not as a political act, not as a public statement, but as a private surrender. From that day forward, I made myself one simple rule. Each night, before sleep, I kneel. I read the Bible. I pray to Jesus Christ for 10 to 15 minutes. I do not ask for power. I do not ask for victory. I do not ask to be spared hardship. I place my life into His protection, my work, my family, the things I understand, and especially the things I do not. I did this quietly. No witnesses, no announcement, no expectation of reward. At first it felt like routine, something ordinary, something almost small. But after months of this discipline, something became impossible to ignore. My life did not become easy, but it became aligned. Problems still came. Crises still arrived without warning. Enemies did not disappear. Yet when I looked back and connected the events, the timing, the narrow escapes, the unexpected openings, I saw a pattern too precise to dismiss. Not chaos, not luck, but guidance. I did not feel led with thunder or fire. I felt led in silence, in small adjustments, in gentle redirections that only revealed their meaning after the danger had passed. What I am about to share with you is not theology, it is testimony. I speak to Muslims, to Christians, to leaders of the Sahel, and to those watching from faraway lands who still believe that faith and leadership can walk together. These are not stories meant to impress. They are moments that changed me. If you are willing, walk with me through them. That night began like many others. There was no warning written in the sky, no sense of fear pressing on my chest, no voice telling me that danger was near. I finished my day carrying the usual weight of responsibility, meetings, decisions, conversations that linger long after they end. The kind of fatigue that settles not in the body but in the mind. As always, before sleep I knelt. I opened the Bible. I read slowly, not searching for signs, not hunting for meaning. I prayed to Jesus Christ the same way I had prayed for months. I did not ask for protection from harm. I did not ask to be warned of enemies. I only placed myself in His care. That night, however, something felt different. Not dramatic, not frightening. It was a calm that carried weight. A stillness that did not feel empty, but attentive. When I finished praying, a thought settled in my mind with unusual clarity. It was not a command. It was not urgent. It was a simple nudge. Change a small decision tomorrow. Nothing more specific than that. No explanation. No reason. I did not argue with it. I did not analyze it. I went to sleep in peace. The next morning unfolded normally. Sunlight. Routine. The quiet discipline of preparation. Yet as I prepared to leave, I hesitated. For no logical reason, I delayed. Just a few minutes. Not enough to matter, I told myself. Then, without planning it, I altered my route. A different street. A slight change in timing. I did not feel clever. I did not feel protected. I felt indifferent, almost unaware that anything unusual was happening. Hours later, the news reached me. There had been a serious accident. Violent. Unforgiving. It occurred at the exact place, at the exact time, where I was meant to be. The details aligned too precisely to ignore. I stood still as the realization took hold. Not panic, not fear. A quiet understanding. If I had left on time, if I had followed my usual path, I would have been there. No strategy could explain the avoidance. No intelligence report. No human warning. Only a small redirection. So small it almost seemed meaningless. I did not feel triumphant. I felt humbled. Because I understood something important. God did not rearrange the world for me. He did not stop the accident. He did not erase danger from existence. He adjusted my steps. That was all it took. I reflected on this for many days afterward. I did not speak of it publicly. I carried it privately, like something fragile. Leadership teaches you to believe you are responsible for everything. Faith teaches you that you are not. That moment stripped away an illusion I had carried for years. The illusion of control. I realized how often we ask God to change outcomes when He is willing to change direction. How often we beg for rescue when guidance is already present. This experience did not make me careless. It made me attentive. I became more willing to pause, more willing to listen, less convinced that speed was strength. I began to understand that obedience does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like leaving late. Sometimes it looks like taking another road. Sometimes it looks like trusting a quiet instinct that makes no sense on paper. For those who believe that miracles must be loud, this story offers disappointment. There was no spectacle. But for those who have lived long enough to know how fragile life truly is, this story carries weight. Because survival is not always about bravery. Sometimes it is about humility. I speak to those watching from distant places who have lived through decades of loss, war, illness, and near misses. You know what it means to look back and say, I should not be here. That is not coincidence. That is grace. I did not earn that protection. I did not deserve it more than anyone else. I simply placed myself in God's hands, and He moved my feet. This is why I continue to kneel each night, not because I expect miracles, but because I understand how little separates life from loss. And because I know now that guidance does not always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers. There was a period in my life when effort no longer produced movement. Those who have led for many years know this season well. You push, but nothing shifts. You plan, but nothing responds. I was facing a project that had quietly become a burden, not because it was unimportant, but because it refused to move forward. Funding was uncertain. People were tired. Partners had stopped answering messages. Every door I approached felt closed before my hand touched it. At first, I did what leaders are trained to do. I analyzed, I restructured, I applied pressure. Nothing worked. Weeks passed, then months. The silence became heavier than opposition. Opposition at least gives you something to respond to. Silence leaves you alone with doubt. Each night, I still knelt. I still read scripture. I still prayed to Jesus. But something changed in how I prayed. I stopped asking for success. I realized that I did not truly want the project saved if it was not aligned. What I wanted was clarity. So I prayed one simple sentence. Lord, lead me on the right path, whatever the outcome. No bargaining, no conditions, no urgency, just surrender. I expected nothing dramatic to follow. A few days later, my phone rang. It was a name I had not seen in a long time. Someone who had gone silent months earlier. Someone I had quietly written off. The conversation began cautiously, then shifted. They did not call to apologize. They did not call to explain. They called with solutions, not partial ones, not fragile ones. They brought resources, connections, options I had not considered and could not have arranged on my own. What stunned me was not the assistance, it was the timing. Nothing had changed on my side. I had not applied pressure. I had not followed up. The only thing that had changed was my posture in prayer. The project did not merely survive, it transformed. What I once feared would fail quietly concluded with completeness, not excess, not pride, completion. As I reflected on this, a realization settled in. When we pray only for outcomes, we remain attached to control. When we pray for direction, we release it. This was not a lesson about passivity. I did not stop working. I did not stop planning, but I stopped forcing doors. I learned to recognize the difference between effort and alignment. In leadership, we are praised for persistence. Rarely are we taught discernment. There is a moment when persistence becomes resistance. A moment when pushing harder delays what surrender would allow. I began to see how often my anxiety had disguised itself as responsibility. How often urgency had replaced wisdom. This experience taught me something I wish every leader could learn early. God does not always reward intensity. He often rewards trust. And trust does not always feel productive. Sometimes it feels like waiting. To those watching who have carried long careers, raised families, endured disappointments that never made headlines, you understand this truth deeply. Some of the most important breakthroughs in your life likely came when you stopped chasing them. Not because you gave up, but because you let go. This event did not make me reckless. It made me patient. It taught me that prayer is not a tool to force outcomes. It is a posture that prepares you to recognize them when they arrive. And it confirms something that continues to guide me. When God opens a door, it rarely looks like effort rewarded. It looks like timing restored. Before these nights of prayer became part of my life, I lived with a constant inner pressure. It did not show on my face. It did not weaken my discipline, but it was always present. Worry had become normal. Urgency had become a habit. Fear of loss had quietly shaped my decisions. I told myself this was responsibility, that leadership required tension, that calmness was a luxury meant for people with fewer burdens. Each day, I carried the weight forward. Each night, I lay down with the same unfinished concerns. When I began kneeling to pray each evening, I did not expect internal change. I believed prayer would affect circumstances, not character. At first, nothing felt different, but over time, subtle shifts began to appear. I noticed that moments which once triggered immediate reaction now created space. I paused more often. I listened longer. Crises still arrived, but they no longer rushed my thoughts. I could feel clarity arriving before decisions, not after mistakes. What surprised me most was the absence of loneliness. Leadership can be isolating even when surrounded by people. You hear many voices, but you carry the responsibility alone. Yet after weeks of prayer, that isolation began to dissolve. My circumstances had not changed. My workload had not decreased. But the sense of being alone inside the weight disappeared. I understood then that something essential had shifted. When the mind rests in God's hands, life begins to reorganize quietly, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to be steady. I realized that many of my earlier struggles were not caused by external pressure. They were caused by internal resistance. I was fighting outcomes before understanding direction. I was guarding control instead of trusting guidance. Prayer did not remove difficulty. It removed confusion. I did not become fearless. I became anchored. There is a difference. Fearlessness ignores danger. Anchoring allows you to face it without drifting. This internal transformation did not make me perfect. It made me honest. I began to recognize when a decision was driven by ego, when urgency came from insecurity, when silence was more appropriate than action. For those watching who have lived long lives, who have raised children, buried loved ones, faced illness or financial loss, you know this truth well. The most profound changes are rarely visible to others. They happen where no one applauds. Peace does not announce itself, it settles. I often hear people ask why prayer does not change their circumstances immediately. I understand that question now. Sometimes God begins by changing the one who is asking, not to deny them what they want, but to prepare them for what they need to carry. This inner change became the foundation for everything that followed. Without it, the external events would have broken me. With it, I could stand. There is a misunderstanding I want to correct gently. Prayer did not make my life smooth. It did not erase opposition. It did not silence criticism or remove danger. The problems remained. The difference was that I no longer wandered inside them. Before prayer became my nightly discipline, difficulty felt like fog. I would move forward but without certainty. Every problem felt urgent, every choice felt heavy, and every mistake felt final. After months of kneeling, something subtle but firm took shape. When problems appeared, I no longer asked, how do I escape this? I asked, what is the right step inside this? That question changed everything. I stopped measuring success by speed. I stopped interpreting resistance as failure. I stopped confusing noise with importance. Prayer did not remove the storm. It gave me a compass. Many people believe that faith is meant to shield them from hardship. When hardship arrives anyway, they feel abandoned. I felt the opposite. Because when hardship came, I was no longer surprised by it. I was steady within it. There were moments when the path ahead was still unclear, but I knew I was being led, even if I could not see where. This knowledge removed panic, and panic is often more dangerous than the problem itself. I want to speak directly to those watching who have lived through many seasons. You know that confusion can exhaust a person faster than work. You know that uncertainty can break a spirit faster than loss. Prayer did not answer every question. It prevented me from asking the wrong ones. I stopped asking why every difficulty existed. I started asking how to walk faithfully through it. That shift preserved my strength. One of the hardest things for a disciplined mind to accept is this truth. God rarely works in the way we expect. We look for signs that are unmistakable. We wait for clarity that removes all doubt. We want answers that arrive fully formed. But that is not how guidance usually comes. After months of kneeling in prayer, I began to notice a pattern that was easy to overlook. Nothing in my life changed all at once. There was no single moment where everything became clear. Instead, change arrived in fragments. A few minutes of delay, a conversation that happened when it should not have, a decision postponed without reason. At first, I dismissed these moments as coincidence, but as they accumulated, their precision became impossible to ignore. I began to understand that God was not reshaping my life in large movements. He was shaping my attention. He was teaching me to notice what I once rushed past. I had believed that leadership required constant motion, that hesitation was weakness, that stillness meant losing ground. Prayer corrected that belief quietly. I learned that God often places direction inside restraint, inside pauses that feel inconvenient, inside interruptions that feel unnecessary. There were days when a delayed meeting prevented an argument, days when a postponed decision avoided a mistake, days when a brief silence allowed clarity to emerge. None of these moments looked like miracles, yet each one altered an outcome. I began to see how easily a life can change direction without announcing itself. A different word spoken, a message unanswered, a step not taken. God did not demand my attention. He waited for it. For those watching who have lived long enough to recognize regret, this truth may feel familiar. You know how often life turns on moments that seemed insignificant at the time? How a single choice can echo for decades? Prayer did not give me foresight. It sharpened awareness. I became more careful with small decisions, more respectful of intuition that arrived without explanation. I stopped asking God for grand signs. I began asking Him to guard my steps. And step by step, He did. For a long time, I believed miracles had to announce themselves. I thought they would arrive with witnesses, with proof that could be pointed to, with outcomes so large that no one could deny them. Prayer slowly dismantled that expectation. I began to understand that many miracles pass quietly through a life without drawing attention, not because they are small, but because they are personal. A miracle is not always surviving something dramatic. Sometimes it is avoiding what you never knew was coming. I noticed how often danger no longer reached me, not through force, but through absence. Meetings that were canceled at the right moment, journeys that were delayed just enough, decisions that felt uncertain yet proved correct later. None of these moments created stories others would believe easily, yet together they formed a pattern of protection. I realized that God does not always show us what He saves us from. Often He spares us the burden of knowing. This understanding changed how I defined blessing. I stopped measuring it by visible success. I stopped counting it by applause. Instead, I measured it by peace retained, by damage avoided, by clarity preserved. For those who have lived long lives, you know that survival is often quiet. You know that the most important moments are the ones that did not happen. Prayer taught me to respect what remains unseen. It taught me that miracles do not always interrupt life. They often preserve it. There is a fear many people carry, even if they never speak it. The fear that if they place their life fully in God's hands, they will lose themselves, that obedience will shrink them, that faith will erase their choices. I carried that fear once. I believed leadership required absolute autonomy, that to kneel was to weaken, that surrender meant surrendering identity. Prayer corrected that misunderstanding slowly. I did not lose the ability to choose. I gained the ability to choose without fear. Each night, when I placed my life before Jesus, I did not feel controlled. I felt accompanied. There is a difference between giving up control and giving up responsibility. Prayer never removed responsibility. It removed isolation. I still made decisions. I still carried consequences, but I no longer carried them alone. That distinction matters deeply. Freedom without guidance becomes anxiety. Authority without humility becomes burden. Prayer gave me a form of safety I had never known. Not safety from danger, safety from being lost. I could walk forward without certainty, knowing I was not walking blindly. This understanding reshaped my leadership. It softened my urgency. It strengthened my resolve. I learned that surrender does not weaken the will. It anchors it. I want to speak carefully here. I do not claim that every prayer is answered the way we hope. I do not claim that faith guarantees outcomes. I do not claim that kneeling removes sorrow from the world. I have prayed prayers that were not fulfilled in the form I imagined. I have waited longer than I wanted. I have accepted answers that felt like silence at first. But through all of this, one truth has remained steady. No sincere prayer offered to Jesus Christ is ever ignored. Sometimes the answer arrives as protection, sometimes as delay, sometimes as strength instead of change. I learned that God's faithfulness is not measured by how closely events match our expectations. It is measured by His presence within them. There were nights when I knelt with more questions than words, nights when all I could offer was honesty. Those prayers did not feel powerful. They felt human. Yet they mattered. Because prayer is not about performance. It is about relationship. God does not respond to polished language. He responds to sincerity. I stopped trying to pray correctly. I started praying truthfully. And that honesty became a refuge. I speak now to Muslims, Christians, leaders, elders, and those who have walked with God for decades. You know that faith matures beyond expectation. That trust grows not from certainty, but from endurance. Prayer did not make me certain of outcomes. It made me certain of accompaniment. I was not forgotten, and neither are you. I speak now not only as a leader of a nation, but as a man who has learned where strength truly rests. The world today moves quickly, but it is not at peace. Technology advances, but wisdom often lags behind. Voices grow louder, yet hearts grow more distant. I have seen how fear divides people who share the same land, how pride separates those who share the same faith, how anger blinds those who once desired justice. Africa carries wounds that history has not healed. The Sahel carries burdens that words often fail to capture. And the world watches, sometimes with concern, sometimes with judgment. Yet I believe something deeply. I believe goodness has not disappeared. I believe repentance is still possible. I believe that hearts can still turn back toward what is right. I do not ask the world to follow me. I ask it to remember humility. I do not ask leaders to claim holiness. I ask them to remember accountability. I do not ask people to abandon reason. I ask them to rediscover conscience. Faith, when lived quietly, does not divide. It grounds. When prayer becomes discipline instead of display, it heals. When belief becomes action instead of argument, it restores. I pray for Africa, not for dominance, but for dignity. Not for revenge, but for renewal. I pray for the Sahel, that violence may give way to stability, that despair may yield to patience. I pray for the world, that anger may soften, that pride may loosen its grip, that people may choose the harder path of goodness over the easier path of destruction. To those who have walked many years, who have seen cycles repeat, who carry both wisdom and weariness, I honor you. Your prayers matter. Your faith matters. Your endurance matters. If there is one thing my journey has taught me, it is this. No one is too important to kneel. No one is too burdened to pray. No one is too far to return. Turning away from what harms us is not weakness. It is courage. Choosing the path of righteousness is not naive. It is necessary. If these words resonate with you, do not rush past them. Sit with them. Reflect. And if you feel moved, share your thoughts, your experiences, your own quiet miracles. Your voice may strengthen someone you will never meet. Stay connected. Continue the conversation. Walk with us as we seek understanding rather than noise. I will end with a truth I repeat, not to convince you, but to bind myself to honesty. I am Ibrahim Traore, President of Burkina Faso, and these words I speak are true. I am Ibrahim Traore, President of Burkina Faso, and I testify to these truths with humility. I am Ibrahim Traore, President of Burkina Faso, and before God I affirm that what I have shared is real. May peace find your home. May clarity find your path. And may you never forget that even in silence, you are not alone.